Hey, friends, welcome back. We are launching our series on anxiety, and I loved this episode because we had a dear friend come on today, and her name is Anne Nicol, and she is talking to us about her journey with anxiety, but how it started to show up with her breast cancer diagnosis. And this was just such an important episode to me because she's a dear friend of mine, but also it's October and it's Breast Cancer Awareness Month. And so, yeah, Sarah, what were your takeaways or thoughts from this episode?
Well, I loved this episode just because I think it's such a hard topic to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that we're acknowledging that it's okay to not be okay with a diagnosis as time goes on. I feel like a lot of times in our society, people give you an amount of time to grieve or to work through something, and then they expect you to be over it. Um, and I love how we were able to talk with Anne and also talk about how it's okay to not be okay. And it's
Yeah.
okay to acknowledge the anxiety that you have and that you will continue to have, because having any kind of medical diagnosis that is life threatening really changes how you view life. And every doctor's appointment that you go to or every symptom you have is definitely treated differently than
Mm-hmm.
it was prior. And so I really loved how Anne shared her experience and how she was so open and vulnerable about how it has impacted her life even to this
Yeah.
day. And, you know, acknowledging that it's okay to not always feel cheery and happy, and that, the real
Yeah.
feelings come out with that. So I really
Yes.
appreciated that. What about you?
Yeah, same thing. She gave us a good strategy for how she uses anxiety as a way to learn how to work with it instead of
Mm-hmm.
against it, and kind of almost like personifying it. And so I loved that part. I thought that was so helpful. It's
I
something
loved
that
it too.
I'm definitely going to take it
Yeah.
away and use it for myself and with my clients moving forward. And so, yeah, we're excited about this series as it is that time of year where some people's anxiety can just be a little heightened with the holidays coming up. And now that the newness of back to school has worn off and we're settling into this routine. So
Mm-hmm.
we hope everybody enjoys this episode with our friend Anne.
Yes.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Unmasking Podcast. And this week, Sarah is joining us along with our special guest, and her name is Anne Nicol. And I'm so happy to have Anne on. Anne and I go way back. We worked together in a school district close to home, and we were both counselors there. We were both student support coordinators. And so, to kick off our series on anxiety, Anne is going to come on and graciously share parts of her story with us today, as well as tell us a little bit about what she's doing now, her practice. And so I'm just, again, so grateful that she's here with us. And Anne, why don't you just start off by talking a little bit, if you could, about your background? So, throw in some details about your career path, if you could. How did you choose counseling? How did you get to where you're at?
Yeah. Okay. Well, first of all, thank you for having me on. I'm really grateful to be
Yes.
here. And uh, so I am an LPC practicing in our town,
Mm-hmm.
and I I think back to when I first knew I wanted to be a counselor was when I was in high school, actually, because I took a class. It was called behavioral science something, and we got to go out and shadow in an area of our interest. And so I went to an elementary school and kind of shadowed the school counselor there, and I
That's
loved
cool.
it. And so that's that started my career path, I guess, so to speak. So then I had to be a teacher first. So
Mm-hmm.
went to college, got the 3 years of teaching done. I never really wanted, to be a teacher, but that was part of it. So
Yeah.
I enjoyed my 3 years and then was an elementary campus counselor in a district I was at 3 elementary schools, and then I moved
Wow.
to a middle school. And then I was moved to the job that we shared, Cindy, the student support coordinator
Mm-hmm.
or counselor position for several years. So always in the schools for many, many years until COVID hit.
Yes.
And when COVID hit and I was at home, kind of just contemplating life, I had some other colleagues who were going back to school or going to get their license. So I didn't have my counseling license at this point.
Mm-hmm.
I had a master's in counseling. So I just decided, well, I have this extra time here and let's try something new. So I did have to go back and take a few classes and took the test and started working on getting my hours. And so over a year and a half, 2 years, starting with COVID, I got my license.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was really close to retirement age in the school district.
Yeah.
So it all just kind of came together really perfectly. Um, so I just retired from the school district in December, like mid-year. I was
Mm-hmm.
ready to go do something different and just started a private practice, which I never thought I would ever do. But it's been the best thing, and I enjoy it wholeheartedly, and I'm just so grateful. And it's been a wonderful journey of love, learning, and just kind of proud of myself, actually. So
Oh,
Yeah.
yes. I love to hear you say that because I can remember your decision to go back and get your LPC. I think I had already left the district at that point and gone into private practice, but I was keeping tabs on what you were doing. You and I would get together occasionally. And I also remember when you decided to do the private practice thing and just the normal anxiety that we experience when we make a big life change like that.
I picked your brain and
Yes.
learned many, many things from you. So you were a
Yeah.
big help in that. But that's kind of how I got here. So
Awesome. Awesome.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's amazing. It's so hard with private practice. I think as women, we love the predictability and the structure of a plan. And so doing something like starting your own practice, feels very overwhelming. And then
Mm-hmm.
also the unknown, which, we're talking about anxiety. So it can be very anxiety provoking. But I also think we are very resilient as women. And
Mm-hmm.
so, and we can do amazing things. And I think, starting a private practice and knowing you can do hard things for yourself that make you genuinely happy, that's amazing, because not everybody gets to a place where they are like, you know what, I'm just going to do this and see what happens and jump in the deep end. And so I think that's really awesome. Cindy and I are in that same arena, and we are just like, I think we all at one point are like, well, I'm either going to sink or swim here. So
Right.
Yeah, it's hard to take a risk sometimes. There's a
it
lot of
is.
anxiety around it, around taking any type of risk because it
Mm-hmm.
is the unknown, like you said. So,
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I didn't know that you had worked with elementary age prior to the middle school age, because I think when I met you, you had just come from working in middle schools. And so when going into private practice, I think sometimes for me, one of the hardest things that I had to decide was what population do I just truly love
Mm-hmm.
working with? It's interesting because I was an elementary school teacher for many years, elementary counselor. I do not see children at all. I mean, I see 13 and up, so I guess you could consider that children. But how did you decide what population you really wanted to work with going into private practice?
Well, naturally, I think kids were my first kids and teens, just because that's where my experience was
Mm-hmm.
when I first started my private practice. And I had connections in the school district, and that was a way to get referrals. So that's where I focused at first. But then
Mm-hmm.
as I grew and challenged myself a little bit to get out of my comfort zone, I now focus more on adults and teenagers. I don't see children anymore. It's been just kind of a refreshing change. I had, my years with children, and now I feel like in this season of my life, I feel like my place, I I can serve better seeing adults and
Yeah,
teenagers. So that's kind of where I am
absolutely.
right now.
Yeah.
Cool. I wanted to see if you could talk a little bit about a specific population that you've really found your niche and kind of comfort level with. So I'm going to back up a little bit.
Mhm.
And before you left the school district to go into private practice, can you talk a little bit about was it 2020 or 2019?
2019.
2019. Thank you.
Mhm.
So, can you talk a little bit about the life changing event in 2019 and how that has been for you?
Sure, definitely. Well, in 2019, I just went in for a routine mammogram and ended up having breast cancer. Complete shock. It's not in my family, was not on my radar at all. So that was a big, just shock to life. And at that point, you get a diagnosis and you don't know what to do, so you just do what the doctors tell you to do, and you go through the steps and like, okay, here's what's going to be next, here's what's next. And so I did a I had surgery, and then I had radiation, and then I had chemo, all while I was trying to work, and all with 3 teenagers at home. So
Oof.
Wow.
um I was pretty private about it. I know I told up my team at work. But I feel like people probably started to know because all of a sudden I had a wig on, and I tried to make it look like my own hair, but it was different.
Yeah.
And so I worked as long as I could because that kept me distracted and
Mm.
kept me from thinking about other things that I didn't want to think about. And so I worked until I couldn't, and then I had to take about 2 months off at the end of treatment, just because it had, the accumulation of treatment.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't able to work anymore. So that was just a big shock to my system, just to me. And so, like I said, I kind of just went through the motions during treatment, did not allow myself to feel
Mm.
anything, did not allow myself to think about anything, fears or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
So my treatment ended in January, and in about July, I fell apart. I just
Yeah.
had just an
Mm-hmm.
emotional breakdown, like everything hit at
Mm-hmm.
once. And so, huge anxiety, just overwhelming fears, overwhelming emotions. And so I learned at that point, okay, a person, me, can try to keep things inside
Mm-hmm.
and compartmentalize and not acknowledge, but it's going to come out at some point.
Mm-hmm.
And it came out, and it was not pretty. It was ugly. And I struggled for quite a bit of time with anxiety. And so that just it kind of gave me a new perspective I mean, it's a huge new perspective in many ways. But after I had kind of gone through that mental health journey,
Mm-hmm.
of healing myself emotionally, then I thought, okay, I felt like it was my purpose to work with other women going through breast cancer and going through their own journey. And everyone's journey looks different, but they're all emotional. They're all life changing. They're all
Mm-hmm.
um, anxiety or depression inducing, just some kind of emotional uh, part to it. So that's where I focus a lot of my clients now is women who are going through breast cancer or who have gone through it and
Mm-hmm.
are now trying to define their life after,
Mm-hmm.
or figure out what life is going to look like now that they feel like you're kind of a different person after
Yes.
going through all that. So that's where I focus my practice now. I kind of feel like that's my purpose.
Sure.
Yeah. And thank you for being so vulnerable and sharing that, because getting a diagnosis, hearing about cancer, the big C, all of that, it does change your perspective and what's important to you in life. And as a woman, I heard that you were really just, still maintaining your life on top of doing treatment, being a mom, working, all of these things. So of course you wouldn't have time to really process it because you were in survival mode. And so when you were able to process it, I'm sure that brought up a lot of anxiety for you. And also made you think about what was really important to you and what mattered to you. But it's so hard too, because when we talk about our own podcast with unmasking, it's hard to unmask because we're supposed to be strong and we're supposed to get through it. And I'm sure too, it was like, okay, well, I got through my treatment. But what people don't realize is just because physically the treatment is over, mentally, all of the things that you went through are now changing who you are as a person and how you view every single thing, which brings up so much anxiety. So I was wondering if you could share a little bit about how your anxiety was pre-diagnosis and then going through it, and then post, when you said you really had a hard time, like what that was like for you, and what that looked like, so that other viewers or listeners, sorry, not viewers, listeners, whatever you're doing, can really understand, because I think a lot of women just feel alone in this. Even though there's huge support, you still are just at home by yourself feeling alone, like no one can understand it.
Yeah, it's a good question.
That is a great question. I appreciate you asking, because before my diagnosis, I don't recall having anxiety at all, like just a little bit here and there. And after I got diagnosed, like during treatment, I remember having just weird feelings in my chest. And I didn't know what it was. I just, it's a side effect from whatever. And it was mostly at night. I would really feel it when I was still and it was quiet. And you would think, as a mental health professional, I would have noticed that was anxiety, but really it took me a while to think, oh, maybe that's anxiety, because I wasn't allowing myself to feel. So it wasn't on my radar that it could be anxiety. So figured out, I spent a little time thinking about it, figured out it was when I had my kind of breakdown, like I'll call it. I did get on medication and that helped. And so that told me, oh, okay, so that was anxiety. But I will tell you, you talk about masking on here. When I was going through treatment, I didn't feel like I was masking. I mean, maybe a little bit at school with the kids, I didn't want them to know anything that was going on. But, people would bring us meals and people would do kind things for my family, and it was wonderful. And I didn't feel, I felt like I could just be myself. If I ran into a friend who came over and brought me something, I didn't feel like I had to pretend like I was okay. But I feel like there's more masking for me after the fact, like now in this post-treatment time period, because what you just said is right. You're cured, you're cancer free, you're done with treatment, everything's back to normal, right? No, it's not. And it never will be what your normal was before. And heading into October, Breast Cancer Awareness Month, it's everywhere. So that can be triggering for me. Even though it's everywhere in wonderful support and fundraising, it's still, there's pink ribbons everywhere. And so that's a source of anxiety for me. And with the statistic of 1 in 8 women, that's a lot of women. And so many of my friends I've had friends with diagnosis. And so that there's a form of masking for myself that goes along with that, because I want to support my friends. Or like if I am going in for blood work or CT scan or even just an oncology checkup, there's masking that goes on there, because inside I'm just boiling over with anxiety and fears and what ifs.
Mm-hmm.
But it's hard for me to feel like 5 years out, I can still outwardly show that
Mhm.
fear. Like, I feel like I shouldn't still be in this level of fear that I still am. So I mask it. And even though knowing I need to be authentic, and with a lot of my friends and family, I can be completely authentic and vulnerable, but I feel like there's more masking for myself going on now after the fact,
Mm.
to hide. Like, okay, 5 years out, I'm still very scared.
Oh,
I'm still, every time I
yeah.
feels, like a headache, oh my gosh, now is it in my brain? Or, just, so I don't know. It's
Yeah.
just interesting that I feel like I am masking more now.
Oh, I appreciate you sharing that. And something that you said really resonated with me. I think anytime we go through something that's traumatic, we have these shock waves after the fact. And everyone else is moving on with their lives. And it's like, oh, great, another year's gone by. And while that is such a huge celebration, I can understand, or I can imagine at least, how triggering that might feel if we have a month that's devoted to something where you have a lot of these complicated feelings around it. It makes me think of our interview with Kathy a couple of episodes ago, how she was talking about Autism Awareness Month. And she's like, I don't really feel like I want to be the person that has the bumper sticker on the car and like wears the color shirt, like I've got a lot of complicated feelings about this diagnosis and about what it did to me. And yes, I'm alive and I'm grateful. And yet I also can feel really anxious and not celebratory at the same time, if that makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that gives me an unusual or a unique way that I can help my clients, is because I can be real with them and just say, I'm 5 years out and I still have fears. I understand. And even though I don't understand exactly what you're going through, I do have a unique ability to understand, or to relate a little bit more. And I find that seems to give the women that I work with just some comfort and just some, and sometimes we can just laugh about things that you can't really laugh with other people about,
Sure.
just because they don't understand. We still have a unique understanding, and I think that is a comfort and just helps me with my clients. And also for me to, I self-disclose if it's the right time, that I have anxiety and I had this fall apart season, um, and so I can kind of self-disclose a little bit with my clients and feel a little bit vulnerable with them as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think what people who have never experienced a diagnosis, that is so impactful on whether or not you're going to live, what's going to happen to your body, you don't really have control over it, is when you said you just went in for a mammogram, like you just thought it was a regular mammogram. You didn't have the BRCA markers, any of that. And so, of course, it's going to bring on a lot of feelings after you went through it, because if your body has any other kind of symptom, you're thinking, I didn't even have a symptom before with this one. And I'm sick and I have to do all of these things. And now I actually have a symptom. What if that's something else? Because in the world we live in now, cancer is way more prevalent, and there's, you have to be careful about getting too much sun exposure. You have to, are you sweating in the night? Is that perimenopause, or am I having, swollen lymph nodes? And that's something different. It's so many different layers. And there's so many things with each year that you get out, yet that I think, Anne, 100%, you have every right to feel nervous and scared for the rest of your life, if that's how it is for you, because your whole entire life was put before your face. And that is a scary thing. And that, and going forward, and in a moment when you didn't even have a symptom and you heard this. So I think that is, of course, how you will feel going forward. And I think a lot of people feel that. But again, in our society, we're supposed to feel like, oh, yay, you made it through, you made this. But unless you've lived it and you've been through it, or you've been with someone who's really struggled with it, it's okay to feel like every doctor appointment you're scared, because you never know where life's going to take you. And that is a scary thing.
Yeah.
It is. And I appreciate you saying that, Sarah. I really appreciate that a lot. Just that validation. And I think that brings up just community as well. When you, or for at least my path, people come in your path while you're in the chemo room, or on a Facebook group, or just people other friends of yours. I have one of my best friends was going through it at the same time as I was. And so she's kind of sort of my cancer friend. Like whenever I have an appointment, or she has an appointment, we call each other ahead of time. How you feeling? And we're 5 years out. And so we understand each other. And so I have to say, I think those people that, if you're going through a medical diagnosis of any kind or something like this, and those people that you meet are so important, because she understood on my 5-year anniversary that was like a huge day, because that means there's so much less chance that it's going to recur.
Yeah.
And that was a huge day. Whereas like my very best friends didn't know that and didn't acknowledge it, nor my family. And that's fine. They didn't know, but my friend Lori did. And so I'm just so thankful. And I see that within the breast cancer community, especially just women helping each other, meeting each other in the waiting room, or and sometimes some of the women that I see are friends with each other. They've met each other out in the world, and they're just a tremendous support for each other. So I just think this experience has also made me realize how important it is just to have community in your life and a support system.
Yeah.
And to be able to lean on people, and that's okay.
Absolutely. And I think we have to, right? I think part of this platform is normalizing so much of what we are keeping inside of ourselves. It's interesting, you talk about how prior to this diagnosis, you didn't really experience chronic anxiety or persistent anxiety. I mean, sure, things would come and go that would make you feel anxious, but for the most part, you were like, okay, like I can kind of go with the flow. And then when this happened and you're having these like physical symptoms in July and kind of going, what is happening to my body? I can imagine how scary that would be, having no prior experience with big anxious feelings. And so can you talk a little bit about how you help clients who come in, let's say, and they're experiencing their own anxiety, and maybe they don't even know that that's what that is? And you're seeing it now from the perspective of a therapist and also somebody who's gone through this. How do you help them, I guess, understand that and work with that instead of working against it, if that makes sense?
No, it makes perfect sense. Yes, I do have a unique perspective, because a lot of times I can see myself in my clients.
Of course.
From, like, okay, they're going through, I remember feeling that way. But as far as anxiety, I like to focus with my clients on what's happening in their body. What are they noticing? Physical sensations, like I mentioned, mine was all just like in my chest. And so I use mindfulness, which is very much being present and noticing, and partnering that with what do you notice in your body? What are you feeling when you're emotionally dysregulated, or when you're anxious, or are you feeling signs of depression? What is happening within your body? And just teaching clients and allowing them time to focus on those physical manifestations, and then really getting to know their body, as far as, okay, if like for mine was chest weirdness, I wasn't even pain, I don't even know what it was, but then, okay, now that you know like what happens in your body when you're having anxiety, let's pay attention to how it Does it grow? Does it happen really fast? Does it start small and it gradually builds? What do you notice? And then when you're at the top, what do you notice about how you get down, or how, like we talk about kind of riding the wave of anxiety? Like it's gonna grow, it's gonna peak, and then it's gonna come down, and you're gonna come out of it every time, if it's a high anxiety moment. But so a lot of it is just really focusing on the body and being mindful of what's happening in the body and being compassionate to yourself. I never say to clients, like, let's talk about some coping skills to get rid of anxiety or to make anxiety stop, because there's nothing, we don't want to, I don't know, I don't want them to think like they're trying to get rid of something, that it's something that they don't want. I mean, I like my clients to like learn to accept, okay, this is part of what happens with me. This is something, a part of me, but I can learn to understand it. I can learn to manage my symptoms. I can learn to accept it and be compassionate toward myself. And so I think about a lot of times with clients, I ask them to kind of separate anxiety from themselves. And this sounds kind of funny, but they always end up really liking this. Like, okay, if your anxiety came walking in the door, what would it look like? Would it, and have them, and it's interesting because everybody's is something different. Some people it's a rock. Some people it's like a big, giant, squiggly, black character out of control. And so I have them kind of.
Sorry, I'm laughing because I'm thinking what mine would look like.
I was too.
Right?
Mine has like Gary Busey vibes. It's just like, sorry.
That is a good one. I love it.
Oh my gosh. That's a good one.
But when you like externalize it, that it's not you.
Right.
It's, something happening to you. And it's separate from you. And then part of that exercise is also, once we've identified it or they've created it, sometimes with kids, I have them draw it or create it with clay. Sometimes even with adults, they like to really, define it and visualize, make it something visual. And then we talk about talking to it, like acknowledging that it's here. Like when you notice your anxiety building inside your body and you're picturing this Gary Busey person,
I know.
sitting right next to you, yelling in your ear or something, acknowledge it, like, hello, anxiety, I see you're here. Or if they've named it, like, hello, Gary, I see you're here. I feel you, but I don't need you right now, so you can go away. Or, I noticed that you're here. I've got this. So I don't need you right now. And almost, which it sounds kind of strange. I think some clients are like, oh, okay. And, but then when like we really get into it and we try it, they twofold, it's something separate. It's not defining them. So it's something that is separate from themselves, but also that they recognize that it's there. They acknowledge and validate that it's there, so they don't, so that they can recognize and be compassionate toward themselves. Okay, I see that you're here, but I don't need you right now. I've got this. Or maybe, you're really big right now, but I'm going to watch you shrink. Or something, just where they can, I don't know. I just like that way of looking at anxiety.
I love it.
I think that's wonderful.
I'm going to use that.
Yeah, no kidding.
I'm going to use that in my sessions. And I love it because with anxiety, I always tell like my little kids, like, and their parents, you have to have some anxiety. It's a protective factor. It's when it impairs things going on in your life. But getting a cancer diagnosis, let's acknowledge it because you're going to have it. And in a way, it's protecting you because, of course, you need to think about and acknowledge that it's there. And your life is, flashing before you. There's lots of things. But I love how you said, acknowledge it. Don't try to get rid of it and shrink it. Make it to where it's not as loud as it has been at some point, but it's still there because it never fully goes away. We all need it at some extent. So, and especially having a diagnosis that is a life-threatening thing, of course you would have that. So I think it's an amazing way to look at anxiety, and to acknowledge it, and then by acknowledging it, then be able to start quieting it, instead of just, what are ways that we can cope to get rid of this so that you don't
Right.
feel any of these things? Like, come on.
Yeah.
I mean,
I think of it as kind of like, I think, Anne, what you're describing sounds a lot like internal family systems, like parts work. It's that part of you that shows up that's trying to protect you from something. And I think with the relationship to cancer, our body is not in our control anymore, right? So it's kind of this like, oh, I have this thing now, and it's so out of my control. I can't fix this right now. And so this can feel so powerless, which is where the anxiety enters. And so by kind of almost acknowledging it and befriending it, you're saying, I am back at the seat of the head of the table, like you can sit here next to me, but you can't, as Liz Gilbert says, like you can't take the wheel, like you cannot drive the car. You're not allowed to drive the car right now. You can ride in the passenger seat along with me, but you can't drive. So I love that, because you're teaching people how to work with it versus against it. That's cool.
Yeah, and I find that seems to resonate with people, or be a different way of looking at it, because we all hear like, oh, use your coping skills, go read a book, or go exercise, or go listen to music, and those things are great.
Sure.
But also, this is kind of a different perspective,
Yeah.
which seems to resonate with my clients, and they have a fun time defining their anxiety, and like visualizing it and giving it a name, and creating it on paper or play or something. So it kind of becomes a fun thing as well, I guess.
Oh, I love this. I love this. So thinking over these last 5 years, what has been something that has really surprised you about yourself, in relationship to anxiety, or it could just be in general?
I think what surprised me was when I figured out finally that I had anxiety. I At first I was like, oh, come on, Anne, you're a mental health professional. You know what to do about this. And, I almost was like beating myself up that I was having anxiety. But then pretty quickly, so I was kind of, looking back, I was kind of surprised about that I, reacted that way toward myself. What? Come on, get it together. But then I was able to reframe and pretty quickly practice what I preach in a way, but sure, when it's yourself, it's easier to, when it's someone else and you're guiding them through it. But when it's yourself and you're having to pull up and access tools that, about, but maybe you haven't used on yourself, so it kind of surprised me, just that whole, the way I reacted toward myself. When I was falling apart, as they say.
Sure.
Well, and I think too, when you're a therapist, you put so much pressure on yourself to be so self-aware, and, you have all the coping skills. But at the end of the day, we're all humans, and we're all just trying to get through the day, and we all get angry. We all get, we all are happy. We all have all these different things. But I think it's harder when you're in it and so much, you have so much knowledge about it. But yeah, at the end of the day, you were still a woman who a doctor came in and told you you have cancer. And I think, you did with it what any human would do, and you reacted in the way that you knew how to react. And that's okay. That's what makes us human. That's part of life. And, but yeah, it's hard. I think we're just harder on ourselves as therapists. I think we hold ourselves to such a high standard that is it's impossible to meet. It's impossible. It just is. So
I agree.
And what are some non-negotiables that you have for yourself now after your diagnosis?
Definitely making sure I have time for myself. I've always been a person who likes her alone time, or I'm never uncomfortable if I'm at my house alone. I'm always like, "Ooh, this is great. What am I going to do?" Or, so I've always just enjoyed downtime, and so I find, even my kids are a little bit older now. They're
Mhm.
out of the house, but for some reason, they still need me so much. I feel like,
Funny how that
hey, you
works.
guys are yeah, yeah. So I find myself like between work and just my own life
Yeah.
and whatever their needs are or whatever's going on in life, there are times that get real busy, like for anyone.
Mhm.
So I have to be what's non-negotiable for me is I have to be able to either be okay canceling
Mhm.
something or being okay postponing something, being okay saying no to something in order to kind of protect my peace and to
Yeah.
protect, and whether that time to myself, it could be something like meal planning, it could be, prioritizing exercise, it could just be sitting and reading a book or watching, reality TV. It doesn't, it's different every time, but that personal time helps me keep my peace, helps me prioritize my health, make sure I'm buying the right groceries, eating the right foods, and
Mhm.
taking care of myself. So that to me is non-negotiable.
Yeah.
I will cancel something if I need to, and I'm okay with it usually.
And can I share, Anne? I hope you don't mind me sharing this. But we were supposed to have breakfast a few weeks ago, and you.
Hey, Anne.
Hi. This
Where
might
are
be
you,
part that
Cindy?
gets cut out.
I know.
I can't hear you.
I
Okay.
can't hear.
Oh,
Okay.
there we go.
Okay. I'll just edit that part out. But yeah, no, I was just sharing about you and I were supposed to have breakfast a few weeks ago, and you had taken some medication, right? That kind of
Mhm.
one of the side effects is joint pain, right? And
Mhm.
sleep becomes a struggle. And I really loved and appreciated just how unapologetic you were about needing to postpone. And I thought to myself, as a recovering people pleaser who has struggled with anxiety for most of my life, um, I loved that because I thought that to me was just like a moment of empowerment and saying,
Mhm.
like, I can't make it. Like I really want to be able to show up, but I know that this is more important and I'm not going to be at my best and it's just not going to be a fun time. Like,
Mhm.
so sorry, but let's reschedule. And I just thought to myself, like, yes, like this is what we need
Mhm.
more of is just unapologetically being able to say, hey, like there's this thing going on. And for a lot of us, that can be anxiety
Mhm.
Mhm.
provoking, like, oh gosh, like, are they going to be upset? Are they going to be disappointed? And so I've got
Mhm.
all this anxiety. So what do? I go, I feel like crap the whole time. When in reality, what I needed to do was just stay in bed and take care of myself. So I
Mhm.
really appreciate that about you. And I just wanted to make sure I shared that because I think that's modeling caring for yourself, non-negotiables.
Mhm.
Mhm.
I, you know, I feel like this has to be talked about more often, especially with women.
Yes.
The ability to say no. Um, I'm just not up for it today.
Mhm. Yeah, I love that. And that was exactly what it was me needing to say no to something. And unfortunately, it was our brunch. And I love my brunches with you guys.
Yes.
It's one of my favorite days of the month when we get together.
Mhm.
But, part of this cancer is taking
Mhm.
maintenance medication that just has
Mhm.
side effects, and they suck and they're awful some days. And some days they flare up more than others. And
Yeah.
so that was one of those days, and I appreciate so much having friends that I know that I can say that to, and
Yeah.
Mhm.
they're not going to get mad, or they're not going to question me, or they're not going to talk behind my back, or like the
Mhm.
things that we worry
Hmm.
might happen. Um, but so true friends, are ones that will say, you take care of yourself just like you guys did.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And that's a perfect example of sometimes what I have to do.
Yeah,
To
absolutely. Yeah. And I think it like frees up the other person's anxiety too, because had you had said yes, and then you come and then you're not feeling well, and then I'm feeling anxious because I can sense it in you. And so it's just this like big chain reaction of anxiety. And you were just able to be like, gotta postpone. And I'm like, cool, good for her. And then that empowers me to be more truthful about how I feel in future situations. And so I think anxiety is not just the physical symptoms, but it's the awareness, and it's the what do I need to do in this next moment in order to be able to manage what's going on right this second. So, yeah.
Yeah.
And
And
I think as women, and as moms, there's a lot of guilt if, I need to go up and help at the PTA thing, or I need to, it's my day to do the carpool, or just so many things that moms and women we take care of. But I think ourselves, our person, we need to take care of. Like we need to be first too. And I think that creates guilt in some moms and in some women, like as people pleasers, like we put ourselves last, or we want to make sure we're taking care of everyone else first. But sometimes in life, you got to take care of yourself first.
Yes.
And that's okay. And that needs to become more normalized.
1000%, especially, like you said, for moms, women in general. I think we are just conditioned from a very young age to take everything on, and society still has expectations that are very unrealistic because, we're expected to do all of the traditional things at home while also having a career and doing all of these other things. And it's heartbreaking that it takes your body getting sick, to learn I can say no, and that's okay. But I also think it's empowering that you have decided, you know what? I'm going to say no. I'm going to take care of myself because you matter and your body matters. And you should be able, no one should ever feel guilty for saying no. That's one of the things Cindy and I have always talked about with each other is we always are like, you never have to apologize to me for anything. Like there doesn't need to be an excuse behind why you say the no either. There's such a power in just being able to say no with no excuse. And people who are truly in your life, who love you and care about you, they don't need the excuse. They don't need that. They are just there for you. And I'm glad to hear that you have found people that make you feel good and that you are taking care of you because you matter at the end of the day. Yes, you're a mom, Anne. Yes, you are someone's therapist, but at the end of the day, you were born Anne, and that's what matters too. So,
yeah. I love that. And one other question, I didn't send this over to you ahead of time, but I was just curious. We were talking about how, like people feed off of either empowerment or anxiety, I'm curious how your adult children, or I guess emerging adult children, have handled this, watching you go through this and with their own anxiety. How has that changed? What kind of conversations do you guys have about that?
Yeah, it's interesting because I actually recently had a conversation. We were on vacation and I had an individual conversation with each one of them about that very thing because I remember when I was going through treatment, a lot of times I was just on the couch and they were of course helping me, or they would have friends come over, which was fine, and I have my little beanie on because I didn't want to be bald in front of the friends, and they were driving at that time, so they pretty much were able to manage themselves, but I never really knew what it was like for them to see me like that on the couch and ill and what their fears were. So I actually just recently had that conversation with each of them, and of course they each were like, Mom, I'm fine. Everything's fine. But each of my kids does have anxiety. And my youngest, she's 20, And so she was youngest when all this was going on, and her anxiety is probably the highest out of the three. And she has a hard time saying no. And she, some of these things that we've talked about today. And so I have to, of course, I'm mom, so I have to, be careful about I don't want her to think I'm like lecturing or getting into her business, but I do talk to her about how she's taking care of herself, if she's talking to anyone, if she's, saying no, if she's taking care of her body and things like that. And so, so I have noticed they all say that, the cancer and seeing me ill, they were all, we knew you were going to be okay. And, so I didn't really feel like I got a real true answer from any of them when I talked about it to them. Plus we were on vacation. I'm sure nobody wanted to get into like a real deep conversation. We were at the beach. So they were just like, Mom, be quiet. So, but anyway, I do feel like my youngest, I think things affected her more. And I see more of her struggling with anxiety now. And she's in college and her classes are hard. And, it's a hard time in life sometimes. So,
and she sees, I was just going to say, she sees how you're putting boundaries around your time now and how you're working with the anxiety. And even though it doesn't feel sometimes maybe like it resonates with our emerging adults, they're watching how we're managing it. They're watching how we're talking about it and trying to normalize it. And so it might not be overnight, but over the course of time, that matters in how they start to tackle their own, their own issues, their own problems, challenges. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Oh, well, tell our listeners, please, where can people find out more about you? And, it sounds like you're working with a lot of women right now who have had cancer diagnosis or who are in remission or who are just, walking through that. So where can people find you?
Yeah, I have a website. It's nicolcounseling.com, NICKEL, like the coin.
Yeah.
So that pretty much has everything about my practice on there. There's a contact me link. So if anyone has questions, even if it's not about getting therapy, even if it's just something else that they wanted to ask a question about after listening to this, please reach out. Feel free. I have lots of resources also for women. I kind of going through breast cancer as time has gone on. I've collected lots of different resources. So I'm happy to, even if it's not in a therapeutic relationship, if it's just a question on an email, please reach out. I'm happy to talk to anyone if there's anything I can do that might help.
Awesome.
Yeah, we'll link everything. Yeah.
Yes. And I'm so grateful for you, so grateful for our friendship and that you agreed to come on here today and just talk to us about something so personal, but yet also so important. So
well, thank you for having me. Sarah, it was nice to meet you. Like I said, I felt like I know you from listening to your podcast every week. And I just am grateful that you've given me the time to be here because I think you guys are talking about really important things.
Thank you.
Thanks,
and you have
Anne.
definitely made a big difference too, because a lot of women can feel very alone in their journey. And it's nice to know that there is support and that people are not alone and that there's therapists out there. And so we definitely want to get your information out for others who are going through this, who really need support. And we also want to say congratulations to you for 5 years.
Yes, amazing.
And we will continue to, love to have you on again, send positive vibes.
Yes.
And just thank you for sharing your story and being so vulnerable.
Yes.
Thanks,
Thank you
Anne.
both.
All right. Talk to you soon.
Okay.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye, guys.